Trust, I've learned, works a lot like the seawalls we build down here in Naples. Looks solid from the street. Nobody checks what's happening underneath until the water's already come through. My name is Desmond Wolfe. I'm 40 years old, and for the better part of 12 years, I've let almost everyone in my life believe I'm a mid-level architect, scraping by on a modest salary, driving a 5-year-old Honda Pilot, complaining about the price of concrete like it actually keeps me up at night. It's a good act, mostly because it's the only thing that's ever reliably kept the wrong kind of person out of my life. Here's the part I don't lead with at dinner parties. My grandfather built Wolfe Development Group from a single stretch of undeveloped land off Gulf Shore Boulevard into one of the largest privately held real estate and hospitality companies on the Gulf Coast of Florida. I grew up in a house in Port Royal, with a dock out back and a trust fund that, if I wanted to, could buy most of the block I grew up on. When you grow up like that, you get very good, very fast, at spotting people who are interested in you and people who are interested in what you're worth. So when I met Chloe 6 years ago, I didn't lead with any of it. She was sharp, funny, ambitious, a rising sales director at a luxury brokerage on Fifth Avenue South, the kind of woman who could read a room in 4 seconds flat. I told her I was a junior architect trying to build a name for myself. She married the guy in the Honda Pilot. For 6 years, I thought I'd finally found someone who wanted me and not the Wolfe name. I still remember the exact afternoon I let myself believe it. 8 months into dating, we sat on a bench near the Naples Pier, splitting a paper basket of fries, and I told her, carefully, testing the water, that architecture paid less than people assumed, that some months ran tight. She just shrugged and licked salt off her thumb. "Desmond, I didn't fall for your bank account," she said. "I fell for the way you get excited about a building nobody else even bothers to look up at." I remember thinking, right there with the grease on my fingers and the Gulf breeze coming in, that I'd finally found someone who saw past the version of myself I'd built specifically to keep people out. I proposed on that same pier 14 months later. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out exactly how wrong a man can be about the woman sleeping next to him. It was a Thursday evening, early March, a little after 7. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the shower running upstairs. Chloe had come home 20 minutes earlier, plugged her phone into the charger on the kitchen counter, the way she did every evening without fail, and gone straight upstairs to wash off the day. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter, our black lab, Scout, asleep across my feet, enjoying about 4 minutes of peace before dinner. Chloe's phone sat on the counter, screen up, charging cord snaking off toward the outlet. It buzzed once, lit up at the edges. I wasn't trying to look, but the glow caught my eye the way headlights catch you at night. You don't decide to look, your eyes just go there. Unknown number. Last night meant everything to me. I stood there with the dish towel still in my hand, reading those 6 words twice, waiting for my brain to arrange them into something that didn't mean what it obviously meant. My heart didn't race. It just stopped. Then it started again, hard, like it was running to catch up with something that had already happened without it. I picked up the phone. Locked, but Chloe had used the same passcode since the day I proposed, our anniversary date. I typed it in. I opened the thread. I didn't need to scroll far to understand this wasn't new. My thumbs moved before I fully decided to let them. Me, as Chloe. Come over. He's gone. I hit send. The regret landed about half a second later, cold, but the message was already delivered. I didn't wait around to see if he'd reply. I deleted the outgoing message, deleted the notification banner still sitting on the lock screen, and set the phone back exactly where I'd found it. Screen down, cord still plugged in, like nothing at all had happened on that counter. Whatever Julian said back, if he said anything back, Chloe was never going to see it. Neither was I, for that matter. I didn't need his reply. I already knew he'd come. Short version of what happened in my head over the next 11 minutes. Nothing useful. I just stood in my own kitchen, listening to the shower running, waiting to see what kind of man was about to walk through my front door. The doorbell rang at 7:14. I walked to the entryway. I didn't run. I didn't grab anything. I smoothed my shirt, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open expecting, I don't know what, a stranger. Somebody I could hate cleanly and simply. Instead, I found myself looking at a face I actually recognized. Julian Cross stood on my porch in a tailored charcoal overcoat, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. A smile that didn't come anywhere near his eyes. He was maybe 39 and I knew exactly who he was. Because 6 weeks earlier, a woman at the yacht club had pointed him out across the bar and called him, very quietly, the man you call when you need a problem to disappear. For a price. The corner of a document poked out from the edge of that portfolio, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of a bank logo before he shifted his arm and it disappeared again. Whatever he was carrying, it wasn't a love letter. I didn't know it yet, but Julian Cross wasn't my wife's lover. Not really. He was something a lot more expensive than that. Julian's smile faltered the second he registered my face instead of Chloe's. You must be Desmond, he said smoothly, recovering fast. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, finishing his sentence for him. Sure. He studied me for a second, the way you study a door you're not sure is locked. I kept my face blank. The same flat, mildly tired expression I wear when a contractor tells me lumber's up again. Here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You get very, very good at using it. I could have exploded right there on my own porch. Part of me wanted to. But Julian Cross doesn't strike me as a man who sticks around once things get loud. Men like that run, and when they run, they take whatever leverage they're holding with them. If I blew this up in the doorway, Chloe would panic, Julian would vanish, and I'd never actually find out what was going on. And whatever Julian told me right now, cornered on my own porch, would be a story built to get himself back to his car. Not the truth. I didn't want his version of events. I wanted paper. Bank records don't know how to lie to your face. So instead, I reached for my wallet. Whatever business you think you have here tonight is finished, I said quietly. You're going to turn around, walk back to your car, and forget this address ever existed. That's worth something to me. Name a figure. Julian blinked, clearly not expecting that particular move. Excuse me? I'm not interested in a scene, I said. And I'm not interested in an explanation tonight either. I've got my own way of finding out what I need to know. So here's how this goes. You walk out of here quietly, a little richer, and whoever sent you tonight never hears a word about it from me. Or we do this the loud way, and you lose whatever it is you actually came here for. Name a figure. He studied me a beat longer, then named one. I paid it in cash out of the small safe in my garage. Not a fortune, just enough to buy silence for one night. And Julian Cross walked off my porch without another word. Portfolio still tucked under his arm. Like he just closed a very ordinary deal. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I stood alone in that entryway for a few seconds after Julian's taillights disappeared down the street. My hands, I noticed, weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. I hadn't cried since my grandfather's funeral, and I wasn't about to start over a stranger with a leather portfolio. But something in my chest ached in a way I hadn't expected. Not rage, not yet. Grief. Whatever I'd built with Chloe over 6 years, real or not, I'd believed in it completely. Believing in something and finding out it's hollow doesn't feel like anger first. It feels like standing in a house you built with your own 2 hands and hearing for the first time exactly how much the floor creaks. The shower shut off upstairs a few minutes later. Chloe came down in a robe, hair wrapped in a towel, and found me standing in the kitchen exactly where she'd left me. Was someone at the door? She asked, casual, drying her ear with a corner of the towel. Wrong address, I said. Guy looking for the Hendersons 2 doors down. She nodded, relieved in a way that told me everything. The shoulders that had been up near her ears since she got out of the shower dropped about an inch. But something in her eyes stayed tight. Suspicious. Like she wasn't sure she believed her own relief. She had no idea I'd just paid her blackmailer to leave. She had even less idea that I already knew exactly who he was. I didn't confront her that night. I made dinner. I asked about her day. I watched my wife of 6 years lie to my face about a stranger at our door, and I smiled and asked if she wanted wine with the salmon. Because here's what I understood standing in that kitchen. Chloe wasn't just cheating. If Julian Cross was involved, she was being bled dry by a professional. And whatever secret he was holding over her was big enough that she'd rather sleep with a man she was terrified of than tell her own husband the truth. I didn't know yet what that secret was, but I intended to find out before she found out anything at all about me. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in almost 4 years. I called Grant Ellison. Grant is 61, has managed the Wolf Family Trust since I was 28, and has a voice like a man who's spent 3 decades making sure nobody ever gets to surprise him. "Desmond Wolf," he said when he picked up. Dry as ever. "To what do I owe this rare pleasure? Did the concrete finally win?" "I need the Chloe file pulled," I said, sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a job site I wasn't actually visiting that day. "Financial disclosures. Anything filed with the state. And I need to know if there's been any activity on the house." The joking left his voice instantly. "What kind of activity?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm calling. Give me a few hours," Grant said. "I'll have something before you need to be anywhere else today." He called back in just under 4. Friday afternoon, I sat across from Grant in his downtown office on Goodlet Frank Road, a mahogany table between us covered in more paperwork than I expected for a marriage I thought was, until Thursday, in reasonably good shape. "She took out a second mortgage on the house 4 months ago," Grant said, sliding a document across the table. $240,000. Your signature's on it." I stared at the page. My signature. Close, careful, patient. Not mine. "I never signed this," I said. "I didn't think you had." Grant said, "It's a good forgery. She's clearly had practice, or help." My chest did that thing again. Stopped, then caught up hard. Forgery. My own wife had forged my name on a $250,000 loan, and I'd spent 4 months complaining to her about the price of lumber like a man who genuinely couldn't afford new cabinets. "There's more," Grant said, not unkindly. He pulled a second folder toward himself. "I made a call to an old colleague who handles compliance work for luxury brokerages down here. Chloe worked in Miami before she moved to Naples, a firm called Sabal Point Realty. 3 years ago, an internal audit flagged a shortfall in client escrow accounts she managed, a little over $90,000. The money was quietly repaid before the audit closed, no charges filed, no public record, but somebody kept the paper trail." I sat back in my chair. The pieces slid into place with the kind of quiet click I usually only feel when a structural drawing finally makes sense. "Julian Cross," I said. "Would be my guess," Grant said. "A man like that doesn't need much. An old audit file, a few loose ends nobody bothered burning properly. He's not blackmailing her over an affair, Desmond. The affair's just the delivery system. He's blackmailing her over embezzlement." "How did he even get the audit file in the first place?" I asked. "That's not public record. You said so yourself." Grant flipped a page. "According to my colleague, Chloe told him herself. Early on, before it was blackmail, when it was still just pillow talk, people confess things to a person they think is falling for them. He didn't have to steal the file. He just had to remember what she told him, then track down a copy of the original audit through a contact still working compliance at Sabal Point. After that, all he needed was a printed copy in a nice leather portfolio and a bar tab expensive enough to make the threat feel personal. That explained the corner of paper I'd caught a glimpse of on my own porch. He hadn't come to my door with love letters. He'd come with proof, the same way he probably always did, enough to remind her exactly what he was holding, in case she ever considered saying no to him again. "How much has she actually paid him?" I asked. "Beyond the mortgage?" Grant slid over a printed spreadsheet, 11 months of wire transfers out of an account I'd technically co-owned and never once checked. Because why would I, when my wife handled the household finances and I was supposedly the one bringing home the smaller paycheck? Total, just under $310,000, funneled to an LLC registered under the name Cross Harbor Consulting. "She thinks she's protecting a career worth maybe $180,000 a year," Grant said. "She has no idea she's stealing from a trust that clears more than that most weeks." I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. She thinks she's bleeding a struggling architect dry to save herself. She's actually just handing away money that won't even show up as a rounding error on the quarterly statement. Grant folded his hands. So what do you want to do? I want to know what he wants next, I said. Because a man like Julian Cross doesn't stop at 300 grand. He's going to come back for more. I want to be ready when he does. I sat in my truck in Grant's parking lot for a long time after that. Longer than I told anyone, then or since. At some point, I stopped looking at the paperwork entirely and just stared at the dashboard, and for about 90 seconds, I let myself feel exactly how much it hurt. Not the money, it was never really about the money. But the fact that I'd spent 6 years telling myself Chloe was different, and she'd spent 6 years lying to me about something a great deal bigger than an affair. Then, I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove home to make dinner. Because the act required it, and because some part of me still wasn't ready to stop playing it. 2 days after that meeting with Grant, I called Ray Sutton, my old roommate from the University of Florida, and one of maybe 4 people who've known about the wolf money since before Chloe ever existed in my life. Ray runs food and beverage for a resort out on Gulf Shore Boulevard, and he's the only friend I have who still calls me Wolf Boy as an insult, and somehow means it with love. We met for coffee at a place on 3rd Street South, the kind of spot where nobody blinks twice at a Honda Pilot parked next to a Bentley. You look like a man who found out something he didn't want to know, Ray said, sliding into the booth across from me. That obvious? You've got the same face you had the day your grandfather's will got read out loud in front of 40 relatives who all thought they deserved a piece of it. I told him. All of it. Julian, the forged mortgage, the escrow shortfall in Miami, the $2 million number now hanging over both our heads. Ray didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, you gonna forgive her? I don't know yet. You gonna ruin her? I turned my coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, watching the steam curl up off it. I'm going to make sure she never gets the chance to do this to somebody who actually can't afford it. Ray nodded slowly. That's not really an answer. No, I agreed. It's not. I didn't know it yet, but by the time I left that coffee shop, I'd already decided exactly how the next 6 weeks were going to go. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not even to Ray. I kept the act going for the next 3 weeks. I complained about a client who was slow to pay. I forgot to renew a magazine subscription to save $15 a month, just to watch Chloe nod sympathetically like we were in this together. I watched her get thinner around the eyes, quieter at dinner, checking her phone with the particular jumpiness of someone waiting for a threat instead of a text. About 2 weeks in, Chloe suggested we go to Crescent Bay Grill, a seafood place on the water she'd always loved, the kind of splurge we hadn't done in months, ever since I'd started tightening the budget. Watching her order the least expensive entree on the menu, out of a guilt she had no idea I understood completely, was its own strange kind of comedy. You've been quiet lately, she said, swirling her wine, not quite meeting my eyes. Everything okay at work? Clients slow to pay on the Estero project. I said, you know how it goes. I could, she started, then stopped herself. Never mind. You could what? Nothing. She set her glass down harder than she meant to. I've been thinking we should cut back on things, just for a little while. I almost laughed out loud. My wife, who had quietly wired $310,000 to a blackmailer over 11 months, was suggesting we cancel the lawn service to save $200 a month. Sure, I said instead. Whatever you think is smart. She reached across the table and took my hand, and for a second, just a second, I let myself feel the version of this dinner where none of it was true, where she was just tired from a long week, and I was just a guy worried about a slow-paying client, and neither one of us was carrying around a secret big enough to end a marriage. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last dinner where any part of me still wanted to be wrong about her. I love you, she said quietly. I know things have been stressful. I just want you to know that. Yeah, I said. And the terrible part is, I think she meant it. I think a person can love you and steal from you in the very same season of their life and somehow not see the contradiction until somebody makes them look directly at it. On the last Sunday of March, Chloe came home from an open house, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me, in a voice that shook only slightly, that Julian was demanding a final payout, $2 million, or he was sending everything to her broker and to the Florida Real Estate Commission by the following Friday. $2 million, I repeated, keeping my voice appropriately stunned for a man supposedly worth a fraction of that. Chloe, we don't have anything close to that. Yeah, she said, and something in her face shifted then. Not guilt exactly. Something colder. Calculating. We don't. Which is why I've been thinking. I didn't know it yet, but my wife was about to hand me exactly the opening I'd been waiting 3 weeks for. I think we should separate, she said, quietly. Fast. I'll take half the house equity, we liquidate what we can from your business accounts, and I use my portion to make this go away before it destroys both of us. I sat very still. You want to divorce me, I said slowly, to pay off your blackmailer with my money. Our money, she corrected too quickly. And it's not, Desmond, it's the only way. If this comes out, I lose everything. My license, my reputation. Maybe worse. I looked at the woman across the table. Genuinely frightened, genuinely desperate, and still, even now, calculating exactly how much of a modest architect's assets she could extract on her way out the door. Short sentence, because that's all this moment deserved. I almost admired the nerve. Okay, I said quietly, if that's what you think is best. Her shoulders dropped with relief, the same relief I'd watched drop off her a month earlier when I told her the man at our door was looking for the Hendersons. She had absolutely no idea what she'd just agreed to walk into. Chloe filed the paperwork herself, quiet and efficient, the following week. On a Wednesday, a process server caught me at a job site with the papers 3 days later. I signed for them without a word of protest, which seemed to genuinely unsettle her more than an argument would have. What Chloe didn't know was that the moment she filed, I called Grant, and Grant made 2 calls of his own. The first was to the trust's compliance team, formally triggering a clause buried on page 41 of our prenuptial agreement, one that voids asset division entirely in cases of proven marital fraud, forged signatures, or the dissipation of joint assets to satisfy an undisclosed debt. Chloe had, without realizing it, handed us every piece of evidence we needed the moment she forged that second mortgage. The second call was to a small merchant bank that happened to hold the primary business loan behind Cross Harbor Consulting. Julian Cross, it turned out, was leveraged to the hilt. A fixer's income looks a lot flashier than it actually is once you see the debt behind the watch and the overcoat. Wolf Development Group, through a blind holding entity, quietly purchased that loan in full. I now owned Julian Cross's debt, which meant, in every way that mattered, I owned Julian Cross. I didn't know exactly how satisfying that phone call from Grant would feel until I actually got it. Turns out, pretty satisfying. The final settlement signing was scheduled for the first Thursday in May, at Ellison and Voss's downtown conference room, glass walls looking out over 5th Avenue South. Chloe arrived first, in a sharp cream suit, Julian Cross seated beside her like a lawyer. Though he wasn't one, she'd brought him along, I later learned, because he'd insisted on being in the room when the money changed hands. I walked in 7 minutes later, in a suit that actually fit the life I'd been hiding, flanked by Grant and 2 senior partners from the firm that had quietly managed $40 million of my family's liquid assets for the better part of 2 decades. Chloe's expression flickered the second she saw my face. Something about a man who's about to lose everything doesn't usually walk into a room looking that calm. Desmond, she said carefully, you didn't need to bring this many people. I disagree, I said, taking the seat across from her. I think this is exactly the right number of people. Grant opened the folder in front of him and slid a single page across the table toward Chloe. Before we begin, he said I want to walk everyone through Article 14 of the prenuptial agreement between Desmond and Chloe Wolf, specifically the clause addressing dissipation of marital assets through undisclosed debt and forged financial instruments. Chloe went very still. What is this? This, I said, is where I tell you the part I never told you in 6 years of marriage. I let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. My grandfather built Wolf Development Group. My net worth, as of this morning, is a little north of $50 million. I've spent 12 years pretending to be a mid-level architect so people who only wanted my money would leave me alone before they ever got close enough to hurt me. Julian's face went the color of the tablecloth. Chloe's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You're lying," she finally managed. "Ask Grant," I said. "He's been managing my trust since I was 28. Grant nodded once, calm as a man confirming a weather forecast. "You forged my signature on a second mortgage," I continued, keeping my voice level even as Chloe's face drained white. "You siphoned over $300,000 from accounts you thought belonged to a struggling architect to pay off a man blackmailing you over money you embezzled at Sabal Point Realty 3 years ago. Every piece of that triggers Article 14. You don't get half the house, Chloe. You don't get a settlement. You get nothing." "That's not— You can't." Her eyes shot to Julian, then back to me. "This is insane. You let me believe you married me for me," I said. "I think we're square." I turned to Julian, who by that point looked like a man doing math he badly did not want to do. "You, on the other hand," I said, "have a slightly different problem. Cross Harbor Consulting owes $3.4 million on a business loan. As of Monday, my family's holding company owns that debt, which means I own you, Mr. Cross, the same way I currently own most of the block you grew up admiring from the outside." You can't just—" Julian started. "I can, and I did." I said, "Here's your choice. You sign a sworn statement detailing every payment Chloe made to you and why, and you testify to it if this ever reaches a courtroom. In exchange, I don't call in your loan tomorrow morning, or you walk out of this room today and Wolf Development Group owns Cross Harbor Consulting by Friday afternoon." Julian didn't need long to decide. He signed. Chloe sat frozen in her chair, the cream suit suddenly looking less like armor and more like a costume for a party that had already ended. "Desmond," she said quietly, voice cracking, "please, we can talk about this." I panicked. I made a mistake. "You made several," I said, standing. "Forging my name was the one I can't get past." I gathered my folder and walked out of that conference room without looking back. Not out of cruelty, but because for the first time in 12 years I didn't need to check whether anyone in the room actually wanted me, or just what I was worth. I already knew the answer, and for once, it didn't cost me anything to hear it. Chloe's brokerage license came under review 2 weeks later, after Grant's office anonymously forwarded the Sabal Point Realty audit file to the State Real Estate Commission. She moved into a rental off Airport Pulling Road by the end of May. Julian Cross left Naples entirely, last I heard, working some smaller angle in a city where nobody yet knows to check his overcoat against his actual bank balance. Grant called me that same week, ostensibly to close out the trust paperwork, though I suspect he mostly wanted to check on me the way he has, since I was 22 and lost my grandfather. "You holding up all right?" he asked, dropping the courtroom voice for something closer to an old family friend. "Working on it," I said, watching Scout chase a lizard across the backyard, blissfully unaware anything in the house had changed at all. "Turns out winning doesn't feel as good as I thought it would." "It rarely does," Grant said. "But it beats the alternative." He wasn't wrong. I still drive the Honda Pilot. I still complain about the price of lumber, mostly because concrete actually is expensive, and some habits aren't even acts anymore. But these days, when someone gets close, I let a little more of the truth show earlier. Not all of it, just enough. Because I learned something standing in that conference room in May that I wish I'd understood back in March, back when a stranger's smile on my porch first told me my whole foundation had a crack in it nobody had bothered checking for. You don't actually find out who somebody married by asking them. You find out by giving them a reason to think you can't see them anymore, and watching very, very closely what they do next. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.